Welcome to the Believeland podcast, presented by Michael DeLazo and Co. CPAs and business advisors. Contact them at cpanews.com. I'm your host, Cameron Palmer. Along with me is my co-host, Derek Dimmitt, and a very special guest once again, Alek Koberna. Alek, Derek, how we doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. It's been a great start to the season. I'm happy.
Yeah, can't complain much with 3-0, but we'll get digging into
No.
it and see where we can go as we get ready for the Notre Dame game this Saturday. But go ahead and get started, Cameron.
So I think probably my biggest question is that I still kind of question Kyle McCord. I think he played really, really well against Western Kentucky, and there's no doubt about that. But I want your opinion. What do you think Kyle McCord's the way to go? I know you talked about trusting Ryan Day and how he's like a quarterback whisperer, but how do you feel about the quarterback battle overall? Do you think it's Kyle McCord's team, or do you think that there could still be a potential battle moving forward in the season?
No, this is 100% Kyle McCord's team. I think we saw that this past Saturday against Western Kentucky. The command of the offense, the trust he has with the wide receivers. Over these last 2 weeks, the way Kyle McCord has spun the ball, he looks like what we saw out of CJ Stroud. That's starting to come through in his own way because he is a different quarterback. There are differences in the way those two play the game. He's more of a pocket passer, even though Stroud liked to stay in the pocket. He was a very mobile quarterback when he decided to be. We haven't seen that from Kyle McCord yet, but this is Kyle McCord's team. I have no question. Last 2 weeks, he's had Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka targeted 30 plus times in 2 games. That's what we were looking for. Week one, they were slow out of the gate against Indiana, trying the two quarterback system while also trying to work with the new clock rules. Definitely a lot of question marks. You didn't know what you were seeing against Youngstown State, a team that runs the football heavily. Things starting to smooth out. They gave Devin Brown less rotations, and I think that really started to show this was going to be Kyle McCord's team. And Western Kentucky, I said they were going to name a starter going into week 3. That's what they did. I said that quarterback was going to have to go out guns blazing. That's what he did. I think he showed everyone in week 3 just how good he can be, what he's made of, and where this team can be if they play to that level every week, offensively, defensively. It was a complete game, and a game we needed to see out of this group as well, because it was something we didn't see in the first 2 weeks. But this is Kyle McCord's team through and through.
It seemed like the Buckeyes got kind of a slow start against Western Kentucky. I know there was some Twitter talk about, it, when are the Buckeyes going to wake up? And it seems like momentarily after that tweet was sent, I think it was Ari Wasserman of
Quarter
the
two. Quarter two is
Athletic.
when they
Yeah,
woke up.
quarter two. Yeah, they really turned it on, and you kind of made mention to it already, but can you just kind of talk through that quarter two and what you saw, and if that has the potential to sustain as we move into this big game against Notre Dame and then really ramp it up with Big Ten play?
So, I actually didn't get to see most of this game. I was in the car. I was driving up from Athens. I was down at the Ohio Bobcats game against Iowa State. I was on my way back. Got to listen to the great radio call. So I didn't see it, but I heard it. And I think you get subtle differences when you listen to a game versus you hear it. And Ohio State, we're blessed with some great broadcasters out there in the radio booth. So you get a lot of detail. And I think the parts that you see on TV, you see the quarterback, you see the skill guys. But one of the big things I was hearing while listening to this radio was that offensive line for Ohio State. And that was maybe the biggest question mark outside of quarterback for this entire team. And it might have been a bigger question mark coming into the year. But the offensive line played a lot better here in week 3. And a big part of that came in quarter number 2. New formations were brought on. They brought on Luke Montgomery at right tackle. They were moving these guys around on the offensive line for specific offensive packages. While that might, give away plays in the future, it's showing a faith in this offensive line that these aren't just one position trick ponies. They can be moved all about. And I think that is so important for this team going through, because we saw in week 1 and 2, some of these guys in the new positions, they were slow. They were struggling. They didn't read the play as fast as we're used to with the, couple guys we just sent to the NFL who, by the way, are doing fantastic. DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson Jr. Both had some great starts to the season here. Preseason was great with them. We're used to guys who are performing in the NFL right now. These are young guys, and that offensive line was a big question coming into this week as well against Western Kentucky, a team that forces a lot of takeaways, and that was huge in that game. We lost the football, but it didn't matter. Our defense played to a level we haven't seen in a while. That 35-point performance in the second quarter was the most points we have put up in a single quarter since 2019 against Miami. So that was a phenomenal quarter. Rest of the game, sure, you can say it's a little slow. But again, I think they're still adjusting a little bit to this new clock rule and how possessions are working. The big thing against Western Kentucky, air raid, I wrote about it in my articles. Both these teams were going to get more possessions. Expect some sloppiness. But expect Western Kentucky to challenge Ohio State, and that's what they did in the first quarter, the third quarter, and even to an extent in the fourth quarter, despite the fact that they had 14 points in the fourth quarter, and we shut out Western Kentucky in that second half. They challenged Ohio State at all, at every level in this ball game. There was a challenge throwing into the secondary, at the defensive line. Linebackers for Western Kentucky are solid. So what I saw out of Ohio State and what I heard out of Ohio State was a massive step forward from Youngstown State to Western Kentucky, and that's huge. Youngstown State was the number 25 ranked team in the FCS. They just picked up another dominating victory this weekend here in Youngstown. It's where I'm located, so down the street, people are going crazy. This Youngstown State team is really good. They're not getting the credit that they deserve nationally, and when you look at Ohio State's schedule, because they have the tag FCS next to them, they're a really great team on the offensive and defensive lines, their ability to run the football. That slowed down Ohio State a lot in that game. Western Kentucky, kind of a subpar defense, but they're great at turning the ball over. Ohio State really is just, they took a lot of steps to improve, and we heard that from Ryan Day before the game. He's like, these guys are going to take the next step, and they did just that. And I think that's going to translate really well into Notre Dame. You now have a confident football team, and frankly, Notre Dame's the only game we have to worry about. If they hit Notre Dame hard and they can take that ball game, the Big Ten slate is going to be pretty much a piece of cake until you hit Penn State.
So I'm gonna kind of piggyback off my first question while also asking like three different questions at the same time.
Go for it.
So you mentioned the offensive line stepping up and starting to kind of set into their roles and play better. And you said the second quarter, I believe. And then you also mentioned that the defense has played at a level we haven't seen in a very long time. And then also, to piggyback off my first question, how big do you think it was for McCord to be named the starter going into week 3? Instead of knowing like, hey, anything I do wrong immediately puts Devin Brown ahead of me for that next possession. How big do you think that was? And then how more comfortable do you think it made him knowing his defense is stepping up and his offensive line is getting more comfortable?
Okay, I'll start on that first one there. That's huge. It's a huge confidence builder to be named the starter. You don't have to look over your back. If you make a mistake, you get to go over to the sideline. You get to talk through it with your coaches. First 2 weeks, I think we saw both the quarterbacks really pressing hard. It led to a lot of mistakes, bad throws. They were forcing the ball. And I think you saw here week 3, Kyle McCord looked relaxed. And that's something you haven't seen out of him this season. And really, even when he came into play against Akron a couple of years ago, he wasn't relaxed. I mean, he was stressed. It was his first start. But now he got the road game in Indiana, played most of the snaps, got the home game against Youngstown State, got a majority of the snaps. And now here you give him the full blessing. Hey, this is your team. You're going to run with it unless you give us 20 reasons not to. And that is huge for a quarterback. You get that vote of confidence, especially from a guy like Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and these coaches who have sent countless guys to the NFL. That is a huge momentum and confidence builder for a young quarterback. I mean, we're still talking about college students, who are 18 to 20 years old. You're coming straight out of high school, you don't have a ton of confidence. Even if you were that superstar athlete, confidence is, especially in the game of football, is such a hard thing to capture and hold on to. Getting that vote of confidence is huge. And I think that really did help him. We saw a ton of that this week of how that confidence helped him. That offensive line play, yeah, I mean, that helps you even more. When you can trust this offensive line, if you're Kyle McCord, you can sit back there and say, all right, if my wide receiver takes an extra second to get through his rotations and get out into the open space, I know this offensive line is going to be there and hold on to that. And when we need to turn to the ground game, they were there for that as well. Still working on third downs. That's got to be better, no doubt about that. But this offensive line, first and second down, I've shown a lot of promise after Western Kentucky. And again, when you talked about defense there, ability to force turnovers is something Ohio State has struggled with the last 2 seasons. And it has been a big reason why we have, I'll say it, struggled against our rivals to the north. It's why we struggled against really even Purdue when they upset Urban Meyer as the head coach. This team has struggled to force turnovers for years. It's been a problem. We can't beat the SEC teams right now because we can't take the ball away and we can't get off the field on third down. That's been huge this season, not being able to get off the field on third down. It's something offensive and defensive sides of the football both need to improve on. We saw that here in week 3. Western Kentucky struggled on third down, and Ohio State's defense forced a lot of turnovers. That's what we were looking for. That's what we got. And if you're Kyle McCord, you know, hey, if my coach is trusting me, say we're at the opponent's 45-yard line, we don't get it on third and short, we can go for it now on fourth down. I've got an extra down to play with here because I've now got a defense that I can trust that isn't going to go and let up a bunch of points on the other side, and we have to treat every single possession as if it's the final drive of the national championship game. I think you saw that against Georgia last season. First half, Ohio State could get Georgia's offense off the field. C.J. Stroud had a ton of confidence. We were aggressive playing football. Second half, all of a sudden, Georgia could get down the field. They could score. We couldn't turn the ball over. Obviously, our offense had problems without Marvin Harrison. Everything stalled out. And a big part of that, was Marvin Harrison not being there anymore. But the defense started to struggle, and it took away confidence from the offense. Part of that is Ryan Day. He has confidence issues that have been severely documented over the last couple weeks of the season. And it's something that has plagued him since his tenure began, is his confidence problems. And we'll see how that affects him this season. But that defense is now becoming a big piece for Ohio State. The 40 points or 20 points we've allowed through the first 3 weeks of the season is the least amount of points Ohio State has allowed in 48 years to start the season.
Wow.
That's a crazy stat. You think about in that time, some of the defensive stars that have donned the scarlet and gray. You have A.J. Hawk, Bobby Carpenter, those type of guys, the Bosa brothers, Chase Young, the defensive back that we had,
James Laurinaitis, who's our linebackers coach now, too.
Right, yeah, he was.
You really just touched on the last 20 years. You then get to go another, 28 before that, and just absolute legends, Hall of Famers at Ohio State. And not just that, you talk about the coaches that have been there during that tenure. Urban Meyer, Jim Tressel, John Cooper, Woody Hayes era, at the tail end of that. Earl Bruce. There are some big-name coaches that we haven't seen this level of defense out of in a long, long time. And yes, Indiana, Youngstown State, not huge offensive pieces, not multi-dimensional offenses, but Western Kentucky, if you guys read the article I put out before the game, it was potential air raid. That has been one of the best offenses in college football over the last couple of years, whether it was Bailey Zapp or Austin Reed for these last 2 seasons now. Both of them commanded this offense, and Ohio State shut them down like it was nothing. And that was huge, especially from our defensive backs, who, as you guys know and as these fans know, have had severe struggles since the Urban Meyer era came to an end. And even part of that, tail end of there, they were struggling, and they've been looking for an identity the last couple of years. They hadn't been able to find it. And I think this was the first game you were like, finally, part of that's back. Part of that great defensive back group that sent guys like Denzel Ward to the NFL.
So I read the article, and if anyone hasn't, please go check it out. It was really, really good. All of his work is really good, so go check it out if you're a big Ohio State fans like anyone else here in the great Buckeye State. You did mention how Western Kentucky has put up fights offensively with some of the higher caliber teams. Do you think that was on the minds of Ryan Day and the rest of the coaches and players at Ohio State coming into it?
Certainly, and I think that's a big thing under Ryan Day that we have seen that maybe we didn't have under Urban Meyer, is not taking any opponent lightly. You saw it every season with Urban Meyer. There was some random Big Ten team that came into town, or we went down there, and there was an upset. The one thing we haven't seen from Urban Meyer, from Ryan Day, is that random upset, and that's great. His only losses as a head coach at Ohio State are 2 ranked opponents. That's huge when you talk about a guy in his first years as a head coach, that he's only losing to ranked opponents. He's winning everything else. He hasn't lost to an unranked opponent. That is incredible for Ohio State, and they have a long storied tradition of not losing to unranked opponents, and that is something that they have to hold on to and continue to demand respect of. When someone comes into Ohio State and they're not ranked, it should end 63-10 as it did. So yeah, I mean it's great.
Yeah, and speaking of ranked opponents, this weekend they head to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. I believe they're ranked ninth from what I saw. So a top 10 battle, NBC primetime game. A lot of eyes will be on it. They started the year last year with Notre Dame and were able to defeat them and kind of put Notre Dame in a bit of a tailspin last year. But this year, a new year. What should Buckeye fans expect come Saturday evening?
A lot of stress. You're a lot of stress. I think that's the big one, right? I mean, this is a top 10 matchup in South Bend. And it's a matchup that when you think about Ohio State Notre Dame, it was number 3 versus number 13 to start the season. Now it's number 6 versus number 9. So, these two have been kind of edging closer to one another. And you look at this game, and there really isn't a lot of history between these two schools. It's not a series we've seen a lot of, which I think is strange considering, the two states are right next to one another. It's not a far drive between them. But these two schools aren't ones that have met up before. So, we don't have that history to go back to and kind of pull off of and see what's there. But I think we've seen a lot of strides from Marcus Freeman over there in Notre Dame from year 1 to year 2. Got to give a lot of credit to how they hit the transfer portal, and that's huge. With Sam Hartman coming in from Wake Forest, I followed his career for a long time over there. I thought he was, for years, the best quarterback in the ACC, even when, Trevor Lawrence was there. It was 1A Trevor Lawrence, 1B Sam Hartman. He is an incredible quarterback who commands a lot of respect, and I think that's something people don't think about too much. You see, he's an old quarterback at this point, but on the season, he's got 13 passing touchdowns and over 1,000 yards. They've played 4 games. He's out there slinging the rock properly, and that is huge for this team. Level competition, straight up, it hasn't been there. NC State was a tough battle, sure, but that's a matchup Sam Hartman's used to. He got to go back to the ACC and show out against an old team. He threw 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, but against their only Power 5 team, he was sacked 4 times in that game. So definitely something to watch for is how's that offensive line actually going to step up. But Notre Dame coming into this one, they've got a lot of momentum, and that's hard. And they've also got, right now, while he's kind of still under the radar for some reason, the best running back in the country in Audric Estime, who's got 521 yards. He's got over 100 more yards than any other running back in the nation. And part of that, Notre Dame has an extra game on the season that they've played, sure. But still, you're talking about a guy in 4 games. He's putting up over 100 every game.
How big of a challenge do you think the offense of Notre Dame is going to be for the Ohio State defense? Obviously, like you've mentioned, that the defense is stepping up, but this is probably going to be 2 weeks in a row of a big offensive juggernaut that they kind of have to go up against. What do you think the challenge is going to be?
Challenges? I mean, all of them. If you're going up against a Power 5 opponent on the road, storied program, a 5th-year quarterback, a talented running back, great tight ends and wide receivers are always a storyline there. This is going to open up every defensive question mark that we've had for this team going throughout the season. And even some of the ones we had answered against Western Kentucky, you go, okay, well, now can they do it against the Power 5 opponent? We saw some great plays against a top-level Group of 5 team, but does that translate to a top 10 opponent in the nation? Sam Hartman is excellent at reading defenses. He's not a guy that turns the football over very much, so you wonder, are we going to be able to get this team off the field on 3rd downs? Are we going to be able to force turnovers? Can we stop the big play? That has still been the question. And through 3 weeks of subpar opponents, the answer is yes, we can stop the big play. Now Power 5, now different question. So, yeah, you still just kind of get all the same questions that we've had all year. And now you have to go up against, by far, the most experienced quarterback we're going to play this entire season in Sam Hartman, who has had a tremendous career, who has played in big games. The moment will not be too big for Sam Hartman. That's the one thing we know for certain. It could be for Kyle McCord. He hasn't had this level of a game yet. I think that's another thing we have to think about. We got a first year quarterback basically going into South Bend, Indiana. He's already won one game in the state of Indiana. I like that. So, but we'll see how he fares going in to the Holy Land in South Bend.
Sounds like a challenge for the Buckeyes. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, definitely should be a great game. Definitely one that will, like we said, have a lot of eyeballs on it. But Cameron, did you have anything else?
Yeah, just the way you make it sound, it sounds like this is going to be like kind of a legacy-ish game for Sam Hartman, but also in turn for Kyle McCord. You know, if he comes out and he slings it like he did last week and over the past 2 weeks, sort of, you know, that really solidifies, I think, a lot of the fan base's confidence in him and knowing that he can take us the stretch and he can play those bigger opponents and handle himself and live for the big moments and shine in against the topper opponents that they're gonna face this season. So there's a lot of big storylines coming into it. I think you did a really good job hitting on all of it. So I think you just put about 100,000 more people interested into this game. I'll tell you that much.
Well, I hope so, but you nailed it right on the head there. This is a legacy game, but it's part one of the legacy.
Right.
Last 2 years of C.J. Stroud, the biggest criticism of him when he came out of college, he couldn't win the big game. He had a terrible record against top 20 or against top 10 opponents. He could beat Penn State, but we didn't beat Oregon. We struggled again. He struggled big time against Notre Dame last year. Couldn't beat our rival. Couldn't win in the playoffs. This is part one of that legacy for Kyle McCord, and a legacy that is huge considering what we just had with C.J. Stroud, a guy who was, by all stretch of the imagination, a great quarterback. Just had a good game against the Colts with the Texans. Was impressed by that. Like to see that. But so that's the level of talent you're talking about. A guy who was a day one starter in the NFL, but he couldn't win the big game. Kyle McCord's got the chance to step out of C.J. Stroud's shadow very early with this game. And I think that's huge for the confidence of him, the confidence of the team, and ultimately where this team goes this season. Because at the moment, our ceiling is still the national championship. We saw the defense show up against Western Kentucky. Great defense for the first 2 weeks. Only question mark's really been the offense. They answered a lot of questions there against WKU and now against Notre Dame. If this team comes out, lays an egg, and they lose, you kind of have to go along the rest of the season like, okay, Big Ten championship, sure, but we're not winning the championship. I think is kind of ultimately what this game turns out to be. This is the test for what this team's defense especially is going to be. And defense wins championships. That's why we didn't win it last year. We didn't have a defense. They've got a defense now. This is huge legacy as well for Ryan Day. I mean, I think that we talked a lot in the off season on my articles about Ryan Day and potentially being on the hot seat. They said he wasn't. We'll see if that ends up being the case. If he loses to Notre Dame, if he loses to that team up north, if he loses to Penn State, which at the moment are all very realistic possibilities, all three of those teams are excellent this season. Despite the fact that team up north struggled against Bowling Green for half of football.
All right. Well, Derek, you got anything else to add?
No, I think we covered it all. I'm excited for Saturday night. Should be a great game. And thank you again, Alek, for all of your coverage that you provide for Believeland Media on written content throughout the weeks. Be sure, if you haven't already, to go on to BelievelandMediaLLC.com and find those articles. We have a lot of great articles with high school coverage. Alek on the Ohio State side. Before you know it, we'll be covering basketball. But yeah, great to have you on again. We'll have you on in a couple of weeks when we get into the thick of it with Big Ten football. But thank you again for coming on and taking the time. Me. And where can the folks find you on your socials?
Well, I got a pretty unique name, so it's pretty much always just Alek Koberna.
Yeah, that's easy to find. And
All right.
to follow,
I don't got to add any numbers or nothing. Man. Sorry, Cameron. You got the underscore and a 55 on there.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, it kills to have a kind of a basic name. But thank you guys so much for watching or listening. Make sure you follow Believeland Media on all of your social media platforms, as well as follow our Believeland Prep podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We'll be back on Wednesday with The Godfather to discuss a Week 5 recap of our high school sports and also a preview of our Week 6 as most teams are beginning conference play. Be on the lookout for that. This was the Believeland podcast presented by Michael DeLazel & Co., CPAs, business advisors. Contact them at cpaneeds.com. I'm your host, Cameron Palmer. With me, as always, Derek Dimmitt and our special guest, Alek Koberna. Thank you guys so much.
OH.
I
I